What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, your host with the most, back here with another episode of Clutch Crew Sports, down to the final 3 episodes of Clutch Crew Sports. On this episode, we're going to be taking a look at recapping the 2 teams who got eliminated in the conference championship games, as well as at the end, going to be looking at the Pro Football Hall of Fame finalists and who could possibly be getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame when that's announced. As far as the Super Bowl preview, that is going to come out next week. I'm going to have Eric with me on that one, and we're going to preview the Chiefs and Eagles in the Super Bowl. But for this episode, we're just going to have looking at the Niners and the Bengals and see what their off seasons are going to look like, what they need to do to improve, what they need to do to get better, outlooks for them for next season, and looking at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So, like I said, we're going to get right into it, just going around the shield. And first of all, we're going to look at the loser in the NFC Championship game, and that was the San Francisco 49ers, the team. I picked them to win the NFC title game. Unfortunately for the Niners, Brock Purdy went down early in the game with that elbow injury, and, it basically ended up being to where, they had to play Josh Johnson at quarterback, and then he got hurt with a concussion, so then Purdy had to come back in with that hurt elbow. And the Niners just really couldn't get anything going on offense in that game. The Eagles basically just trounced them. It was like 31-7 was the final score. So not even a good game to watch at all. Complete domination by the Eagles. The Niners defense, they tried to keep them in that game, but it's really hard to even, no matter if you have the number 1 defense or the number 20 defense, it's really hard to keep your team in games when on offense you're just going 3 and out every possession. The defense was out there way too much. The offense couldn't get anything going. Just an all-around ugly performance for the Niners, especially since they were coming into that game the hottest team in the league on a 12-game win streak. And a lot of people, when the playoffs started, myself and Eric included, had them being the ones that were going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. So back-to-back years now that the Niners have been eliminated in the NFC Championship game, of course, for the Niners. So they have a lot of questions going into the offseason, mostly at the quarterback position. The Niners actually don't have a first-round pick this year. Their first-round pick is actually, as of right now, it is going to belong to New Orleans. It's taken a weird path. They gave it to Miami, when the Niners traded up to get Trey Lance, that's when they gave up that pick to Miami. And then Miami gave it to Denver for Bradley Chubb, and then Denver just gave it to New Orleans for Sean Payton. So the Niners don't have a first-round pick, but it didn't seem like that they were going to be drafting a quarterback anyway. So they have a lot of questions here. Obviously, they have 3 quarterbacks to pick from. You got Trey Lance, the one who, was supposed to be the starter this year, got hurt in game 2, season-ending injury, spent the number 3 overall pick on him. You got Jimmy Garoppolo, who, of course, his contract is up after this year. So, and if they don't re-sign him to a new contract, then he'll be going to free agency, the one who took them to the Super Bowl a few years ago, the one who, he led them through most of the season. And then, of course, you have Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, who led them throughout the latter half of the season and the one that led them into the playoffs. So basically this headline here, can the 49ers win to bet it all on 8 games of Brock Purdy? It's going to be difficult because I think no question Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be gone. Like, I don't see any way that Jimmy Garoppolo gets re-signed. So he's going to be gone, no question. So it's really going to be a question now of, between Purdy and Trey Lance. And, obviously with what you saw from Purdy throughout the season, like if he's healthy, then if I'm the Niners, I'm sticking with Brock Purdy. I mean, he looked really well. Like I said, it's going to be interesting for him because he's got to have surgery on that elbow. He tore his UCL in his elbow, so it's like a 6-month recovery or something like that. So there is potential that he could miss like kind of the early parts of training camp and everything. But like I said, then you have Trey Lance on the other side, who's just this big unknown. He's only played in 4 games in his entire career so far. He obviously went down with that injury really early this season. But the other flip side of that is the fact that the Niners, when it comes to Brock Purdy, they got him with the very last pick of the draft. When it comes to Trey Lance, they traded away a lot of draft capital to move up and get him at number 3. So it's one of those things. It's like, you don't want to see from a buyer's perspective for the Niners in that situation. Like, you don't want to, give up on him so quickly if you don't think that he's worth it just because you gave up so much. You took him so early in the draft, to get him. They invested a lot, and they've gotten zero return out of it. So I'm assuming there's probably going to be some kind of competition for the quarterback position in training camp and in preseason. If I had to guess, though, I'd still say that Brock Purdy's going to be the quarterback. Obviously there's also, there was speculation that Tom Brady was going to possibly come. That's now been put to bed because Brady's officially retired for good. So he says, I guess we'll see if that's true or not. But, he says he's done for good. So no Tom Brady, no Jimmy Garoppolo. Like I said, if I'm the Niners, I'm sticking with Brock Purdy. The other headline here is, what's next for the Niners defense following the devastating loss? I mean, I think their defense is fine. I'm not sure. I think a lot of that was basically a result of the fact that the Niners couldn't get any offense going at all in that game. Like I said, any defense, whether it's the number 15 defense, the number 10 defense, or the number 1 defense like the Niners was, it's not easy to stay out on the field and be productive when you're just going 3 and out constantly. Your defense is just always on the field. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at pending free agents for them, but, it's just their defense is really good. They've got Nick Bosa is probably going to be Defensive Player of the Year. Of course, Fred Warner, he's a really good middle linebacker for the team. He's a great leader for this team. They have a lot of really good pieces on this defense. And I mean, they do have Jimmy Ward that's going to be a free agent this year. But I mean, other than that, they really don't have any major pieces on this defense that are pending free agency. So they're pretty much all going to come back. And I could easily see this defense once again, being the number 1 defense again next year. I mean, I said they could potentially lose Jimmy Ward, but other than that, everyone else is supposed to be coming back. So I see a lot of good things going forward for this defense. I think the Niners, they're in good shape going forward. Any team that loses in the conference championship, it sucks that you lose, but any team that gets this far in the season is probably going to be in a good spot next season. And the Niners definitely look like they're in a good spot. They definitely look like they're going to be the favorites to repeat as NFC West champions. There's a lot of uncertainty going on with, the Seahawks and of course the Rams and the Cardinals looked awful this past year. So the Niners definitely should be heavy favorites to repeat as NFC West champs next year. So then moving on to the AFC team that lost, and that was the Cincinnati Bengals. This game, I did get this one right, picking the Chiefs to win this game. And, I know there's a lot of Bengals fans that are whining and complaining about the officiating in the game and, blah, blah, blah. It just sounds like a bunch of excuses. There's a lot of Bengals fans that are coming out and being like, oh, of course it was the refs, Patrick Mahomes, the refs are always behind him. It just all sounds like a bunch of whining and crying, if you ask me. But, it was just the Bengals also, they don't really have anyone to blame in that game but themselves. They had plenty of opportunities. They were going against a Chiefs team that was, Patrick Mahomes was hobbled and on one ankle. They were missing pretty much every single wide receiver at some point during the game. Juju got hurt, McCole Hardman got hurt, Sky Moore got hurt. They were basically left with Marquez Valdes-Scantling and some other dude that I had never heard of. And also, not to mention the fact that Travis Kelce was also banged up in that game. The Bengals definitely had ample opportunity, and, the offensive line just didn't come to play. It was crazy to see the turnaround. Their offensive line, completely dominated the Bills in that game in Buffalo, and they just didn't show up. Chris Jones was wrecking havoc all game. Burrow was constantly under pressure, having to get rid of it. And the same thing on the other side with their defensive line. Their defensive line dominated Buffalo and just couldn't replicate the same success against Kansas City. Mahomes had too much time to throw. And of course, it was a very, very close game, unlike the NFC Championship game. And of course, the costly penalty by Joseph Ossai at the end, pushing Mahomes when he was already out of bounds to put the Chiefs in field goal range. But I mean, just like the Niners, this is a really good showing for the Bengals. It's 2 years in a row now that they've made the AFC Championship game. Of course, they made it to the Super Bowl last year and lost. So, it's really just, if you're looking at the Bengals' future, I mean, it's really the same problem that was talked about at the end of last year. I mean, the Bengals still don't have an offensive line. They've been able to do really good job these past couple of years not having one and still having success, but it's something that, you're not going to be able to win a Super Bowl if your offensive line isn't, at least decent. And, they just got exposed. The O-line got exposed once again. I know there was definitely some injuries going on that O-line, but I mean, having O-line depth is important too. The Chiefs definitely proved that in their Super Bowl against the Buccaneers when they had a few offensive line starters out in that game, and the Bucs defensive line just completely dominated them. So, it's definitely important for the Bengals. There's not a whole lot that this team needs on the offensive side of the ball outside of O-line. I mean, they've got a fantastic receiving trio with Chase, Boyd, and Higgins. Hayden Hurst has turned into a really good tight end. Mixon and P. Ryan are a really good running back duo. It's just they need an offensive line. That should be their whole entire focus in the offseason should be on the O-line. And then, on the defensive side of the ball, really just, again, if I had to pick out the weakness, something that was also talked about last year that's still a weakness is the secondary. I mean, Von Bell really stepped up this year to play well at safety, but it's likely that they're probably going to lose Jesse Bates, during the offseason. They might slap him with the franchise tag, but, there is a good chance that he walks. Eli Apple is really not a good cornerback. It's amazing to me that he's still a starting quarterback in the league. It's just that's where they have to address these problems, on the offensive line and in the secondary, because this team is right there. This team is right on the cusp of being in the Super Bowl, and it's just unfortunate for their sake, of course. They went into that game undefeated against the Chiefs with Burrow under center, and, the Chiefs, this time with a hobbled Patrick Mahomes, not even a fully healthy one, they managed to win that game. So, the Bengals, and then, of course, this isn't the last time they're going to see the Chiefs. This isn't the last time they're going to see the Bills. Those two teams are going to stick around and still be good, and the Bengals are going to be right there too. But that's really what they have to address. And at least, it seems like they were all, of course they were all upset, but at least, there is a lot of, team chemistry and team bonding that goes on with this team, that, they're really close. They really believe in each other. And I will say, even though a lot of the fans and, people on social media have been whining and complaining, I do have to hand it to Zach Taylor. He was super classy at the end of the game, didn't say a single bad thing about the refs, didn't try and blame the Bengals losing on that. He basically took ownership and said, yeah, we just got beat. We just lost this game. So, not much else to be said for the Bengals. But, another team just like the Niners, I mean, they're in a really good spot. Likely, there's a good chance they could be back here next year as well. So, things are definitely not over for the Cincinnati Bengals. So, like I said, that was the recap of the two teams that lost. Like I said, Super Bowl preview is going to come out next week with Eric and I. We'll preview the Chiefs and Eagles. But for right now, I want to go ahead. I like to do this every year and look at the finalists for the NFL Hall of Fame. That's going to be coming up. They will be announced at the NFL Honors who's going to make it. And this is the list of the 15 finalists. There are 3 first-time nominees on this list with Dwight Freeney, Darrelle Revis, and Joe Thomas. And I always like to pick out who I think is going to make the Hall of Fame. I know last year surprised me a little bit with who got in. I know I picked Tony Baselli and I picked Leroy Butler. But I know I didn't pick Bryant Young. I didn't pick Sam Mills. And then I can't remember who the last person was who got in. Because I thought for sure that DeMarcus Ware was going to make it last year. I thought there was no way. Who was it that made it? It was was it Rodney Harrison? Was it Rodney Harrison? I don't know. I'm looking at it right now. But yeah, I said I know I like predicting it. I know, it's always a fun thing to do. Richard Seymour, that's right. He was the other one that made it, the other modern era nominee, which I was also surprised by that. So, guess we'll see how I do this here. Like I said, we got the 15 finalists: Jared Allen, Willie Anderson, Rondé Barber, Dwight Freeney, Devin Hester, Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson, Albert Lewis, which I actually don't know who Albert Lewis is, Darrelle Revis, Joe Thomas, Zach Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Reggie Wayne, Patrick Willis, and Darren Woodson. So going here and picking out, so there's 5 that get in every year for the modern era. So, and a lot of times there's at least one first-timer that's in there. And in my opinion, there's going to be 2 first-time first-ballot Hall of Famers here. I think, no question, Joe Thomas and Darrelle Revis both are going to make the Hall of Fame. Joe Thomas especially, he's like the one it seems like every year in every Hall of Fame class, there's like one player that's like a lock to make it, and Joe Thomas is definitely the lock to make it in this class. I mean, he was the best offensive lineman in football for the better part of 10 to 12 seasons. He made the Pro Bowl every year. He, didn't even miss a single play the first like 10 seasons of his career. So, no question in my mind that Joe Thomas should make the Hall of Fame, no doubt. And then Darrelle Revis, I mean, he really was the definition of a shutdown corner. I mean, the Revis Island was a real thing. And, it's one of those things when you go back and look at his stats, of course, he may not have the most impressive stats in terms of like interceptions or stuff like that. But I mean, one really big factor on like, judging good corners is how afraid the other teams are of these corners. Because, if a cornerback is really good, they don't throw in their direction. And it's why they don't get interceptions, because they don't get thrown to. And that was the case with Darrelle Revis. Quarterbacks just wouldn't even throw at him. He was so good. So, like I said, in my opinion, I think Joe Thomas and Darrelle Revis are going to be the two first ballot Hall of Famers, which means I do think Dwight Freeney's going to miss out. And the reason why I think Dwight Freeney's going to miss out is because, like I said, I was really surprised this guy didn't make it last year. I thought for sure he was going to make it. But this year, in my mind, DeMarcus Ware needs to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's like in the top 10 all-time on the sacks list, especially if you're comparing him to the two other D linemen on this list with Freeney and Jared Allen. DeMarcus Ware's got the most sacks of any of them. And DeMarcus Ware, he's got a Super Bowl ring that he got with the Denver Broncos. Obviously, Freeney's got a Super Bowl ring too, but that he got with the Colts. But I think DeMarcus Ware needs to be the one to make it in this time. I do think Dwight Freeney could potentially make it next season as like one of the second-time ballot on like a second ballot Hall of Famer, but I definitely think that DeMarcus Ware needs to be the one to get in this time. So far we have Joe Thomas, Darrelle Revis, and DeMarcus Ware. Seems like every year there's at least one wide receiver that gets in. And so this year we have Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson, and Reggie Wayne. Torrey Holt's been trying to get in the Hall of Fame for a long time. His greatest show on turf mate, Isaac Bruce, really all of his greatest show on turf mates, Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, and Isaac Bruce are all in the Hall of Fame now. Torrey Holt's kind of like the last one that still hasn't got in. Andre Johnson, of course, he was the premier player for the Houston Texans for a long time. And Reggie Wayne, he came in and he kind of filled the void. Like as Marvin Harrison was getting older, he became Peyton Manning's new favorite target. So out of these three receivers, like I said, Torrey Holt's been waiting the longest, but I think I would have to give it to Reggie Wayne out of these three receivers. I just purely based off of stats. I mean, he's got the best stats out of the three of them. He's, it's just really hard to differentiate wide receivers most of the time. But like I said, because there's just so many good ones, but the Hall of Fame only ever really puts like one per season in. So a lot of these players like, Reggie Wayne and Andre Johnson, Steve Smith, a lot of these wide receivers take a long time to get in the Hall of Fame. So for this one, I would have to go with Reggie Wayne between those three, just simply because of the fact that he's got the best stats out of the three of them. It's not by a huge margin or anything, but he does have the most yards, the most receptions, and the most touchdowns between the three of them. He does also have a Super Bowl ring, that he won with the Colts in 2006. Torrey Holt also has a Super Bowl ring with the Rams, of course. Andre Johnson does not have a Super Bowl ring. So I would have to go with Reggie Wayne here. And then for the last player, this is also really tough because I definitely think, I think Freeney could definitely, you could put both Freeney and DeMarcus Ware in. I definitely think that could be a possibility. I definitely think Devin Hester has a really strong case to make the Hall of Fame. It's, he's got the all-time record for return touchdowns. He obviously wasn't really good in any other aspect of the game. Like, he was a wide receiver. He also played corner the first couple of seasons that he was in the league, but, probably we'll never see another return man as dynamic and as electric as he was. But I guess if I had to pick one, probably going to go with Patrick Willis out of everyone who's left, just because I know the thing that's obviously hurting Patrick Willis is the longevity factor, the fact that he only played 7 seasons or something like that. That was always one thing that really hampered Terrell Davis from getting in the Hall of Fame too, was just the fact that he didn't play very long. because, one of the things that's really important when it comes to a lot of these Hall of Fame stats is, having a good, solid, long career, just over time, like being consistently dominant for 10, 12, 13, plus seasons. And, when you've only played 7 seasons, I know it's like, obviously you were really good in those 7 seasons, but, you wouldn't take someone who only played in the league for 5 seasons and put them in the Hall of Fame because they were that good. I mean, that was the other thing that kept Tony Baselli out for a really long time, because he only played like 6 or 7 seasons. And even though he was really good, it's like, well, he only played 6 or 7 seasons, so it's, really hard to judge like how great of an overall player he could have been had he kept playing. Unfortunately, injuries derailed his career. But you just have to look at, I think with players like that, you have to look at how good they were just in that time. Like, where did they rank during that time? And, the argument for Tony Baselli was the fact that, like, yeah, he only played 5 to 6 but during those 6 seasons, he was the best offensive tackle in the league. And if you have to look at Patrick Willis, I mean, if you look at his 6 or 7 seasons, arguably he was the best middle linebacker in the league at the time. I mean, obviously, of course, he was also playing at the same time as Luke Kuechly, but Luke Kuechly is going to have that same thing when he eventually gets to this point being eligible for the Hall of Fame, because he retired early. It's just, Willis was the best middle linebacker in the league at the time. He was a 5-time All-Pro in his time, 7-time Pro Bowler. The only time he missed the Pro Bowl was his last season. He was the Defensive Rookie of the Year, and even he was on the 2010s All-Decade team. I mean, I'm not sure what else there is for Patrick Willis to put him in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's just, like I said, he's really hurt by a short career, but I think you have to look at that he was the most dominant middle linebacker of his time, and just go with that and take that sample size and put that against everyone else and put him in the Hall of Fame. Like I said, it's the same deal with Tony Baselli and Terrell Davis, and now they're both in the Hall of Fame. And now I think it's time for Patrick Willis to get in as well. So, like I said, we're going to go with Patrick Willis, Reggie Wayne, Joe Thomas, Darrelle Revis, and who was the other person I said? Darrelle Revis, Joe Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Reggie Wayne, and Patrick Willis as my prediction for the Hall of Fame class of 2023. I think I should hopefully at least get Thomas and Revis right. Hopefully I go for 5 for 5. I was 2 for 5 last year, so guess we'll find out and see if I can get these right. But let me know, guys, down in the comments below who you think is going to make the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2023. What you guys think of the Niners and the Bengals, what they need to do in the offseason. Like I said, make sure you guys stay tuned, because Eric and I are going to have a lot of fun making the Super Bowl previewing the Chiefs and the Eagles. Already put down in the comments who you think is going to win between those two teams, and we'll be out with that episode sometime next week. And until then, we'll see you next time.